Chapter 3, From Gathering to Growing Food. Nuno's lunch. Nuno was eating her favorite food, boiled rice, squash, pumpkins, beans, and meat. Her grandmother had grown the squash, pumpkins, and beans in the little garden plot at the back of her house. She remembered the food had been so different when she had to Madhya Pradesh as part of a school trip. It was a hot and spicy. Why was that so? Varieties of food. Today most of our food such as fruit, vegetables, grain, milk and meat comes from plants that are grown and animals that are reared. Different plants grow in different conditions. Rice, for example, requires more water than wheat and barley. This explains why farmers grow some crops in some areas and not in other areas. Different animals too prefer different environments. For instance, sheep and goat can survive more easily than cattle in dry hilly conditions. But as you saw in chapter 2, men and women did not always produce their own food. The beginnings of farming and herding. We have seen in chapter 2 that climate of the world was changing, and so were plants and animals that people used as food. Many women and children played over several things. The places where edible plants were found, how seeds broke off stalks, fell on ground, and new plants sprouted from them. Perhaps they began looking after plants, protecting them from birds and animals so as they could grow and the seeds could ripen. In this way, people, because farmers, women, men, and children, could also attract and then tame animals by leaving food for them near their shelters. The first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of the dog. Later, people encouraged animals that were relatively gentle to come near the campus where they lived. These animals, such as sheep, goat, cattle, and also the pig, lived in herds. The most of them ate grass. Often, people protected these animals from attacks by other wild animals. This is how they become herders. Can you think of any reasons why the dog was perhaps the first animal to be tamed? Domestication is the name given to the process in which people grow plants and look after animals. Very often, people and animals that are tamed by people become different from the wild animals and plants. This is because people select plants and animals for domestication. For example, they select those plants and animals that are not prone to disease. They also select plants that yield larger size grain and have strong stalks, capable of bearing the weight of ripe grains. Seeds from selected plants are preserved and sown to ensure that new plants will have the same qualities. Amongst animals, those that are relatively gentle are selected for breeding. As a result, gradually domesticated animals and plants become quite different from wild animals and plants. For example, teeth and horns of wild animals are usually much larger than those of domestic animals. Look at these two sets of teeth. Which do you think belongs to wild pig and which to domestic one? Domestication was a gradual process and that took place in many parts of the world. It began about 12,000 years ago. Virtually all plants and animal produce that we use as food today is a result of domestication. Some of the earliest plants to be domesticated was wheat and barley. The earliest domesticated animals include sheep and goat. A new way of life. If you plant a seed, you will notice that it takes some time to grow. This may be for several days, weeks, months, and in some cases years. When people began growing plants, it meant that they had to stay in the same place for a long time, looking after plants, watering, weeding, driving away animals and birds, till the grain ripened, and then grain had to be used very carefully. As grain had to be stored for both food and seed, people had to think of ways of storing it. In many areas, they began making large clay pots or wove baskets or dug pits into the ground. Do you think hunter-gatherers would have made and used pots? Give reasons for your answer. Storing animals. Animals multiply naturally. Besides, if they are looked after carefully, they provide milk, which is an important source of food and meat, whenever required. In other words, animals that are reared can also be used as a store of food. Apart from food, what are the other things that could have been obtained from animals? What are animals used for today? Find about the first farmers and herders. Turn to map 2. You will notice that a number of blue squares each marks a site from where archaeologists have found evidence of early farmers and herders. These are found all over the subcontinent. Some of the most important ones are in northwest in the present day Kashmir, in the east and south India. To find out whether these sites were settlements of farmers and herders, scientists study evidence of plants and animal bones. One of the most exciting finds includes remains of burnt grain. Scientists can identify these grains, and so we know that a number of crops were grown in different parts of subcontinent. They can also identify the bones of different animals. Look at the table below to see where evidence of grain and bones of domestic animals have been found. Towards a settled life, archaeologists have found traces of huts or houses at some sites. For instance, in Burjahun in present-day Kashmir, people built pit houses which were dug into ground with the steps leading into them. These may have provided shelter in cold weathers. Archaeologists have also found cooking hearths both inside and outside the huts, which suggests that depending on the weather, people could cook food either indoors or outdoors. Draw a pit house. Stone tools have been found from many sites as well. Many of these sites are different from earlier Paleolithic tools, and that is why they are called Neolithic. These include tools that were polished to give fine cutting edge, and mortars and pesticides used for grinding grains and other plants produce. Mortars and pestles were used for grinding grains even today. Several thousand years later, at the same time, tools of the Paleolithic types continued to be made and used. And remember, some tools were also made out of bone. Many kinds of earthen pots have also been found. These were sometimes decorated and were used for storing things. People began using pots for cooking food, especially grains like rice, wheat, and lentils. That now becomes an important part of diet. Besides, they began weaving cloth using different kinds of materials, for example, cotton, that could now be grown. Did things change everywhere and all at once? Not quite. In many areas, men and women still continued to hunt and gather food, and elsewhere, people adopted farming and herding slowly. Over several thousand years, besides, in some cases, people tried to combine these activities, doing different things during different seasons. What about other customs and practices? Archaeology does not tell us directly about these. Scholars who have studied the lives of present day farmers who practice some agriculture. These have also studied the lives of herders. Many of these farmers and herders live in groups called tribes. Scholars find that they follow certain customs and practices that may have existed earlier as well. Tribes. Usually 2 to 3 generations live together in small settlements or villages. Most families are related to one another, or groups of such families form a tribe. A member of a tribe follow occupations such as hunting, gathering, farming, herding, and fishing. Usually women do most of the agriculture work, including preparing the ground, sowing seeds, looking after the growing plants, and harvesting grain. Children often took after plants, driving away from animals and birds that might eat them. Women also use thresh, husk, and grind grains. Men usually lead large herd of animals in search of pastures. Children often look after small flocks. The cleaning of animals and milking is done by both men and women. Both women and men make pots, baskets, tools, and huts. They also take part in singing, dancing, and decorating their nuts. Some men are regulated as leaders. They may be old and experienced, or young, brave warriors or priests. Old women are respected for their wisdom and experience. Tribes have rich and unique cultural traditions, including their own language, music, stories, and painting. They also have their own gods and goddesses. What makes tribes different from many of the other societies you will be studying about is that land, forest, grassland, and water are regarded as the wealth of the entire tribe, and everybody shares and uses these together. There are no sharp differences between the rich and the poor. Make a list of all the activities performed by men in tribal societies. What do women do? Are there any activities that are done by both men and women? A closer look. Living and dying in Mehrag. Find Mehrag on map 2. This site is located in a fertile plain near the Bolan Pass, which is one of the most important routes into Iran. Mehrag was probably one of the places where women and men learned to grow barley and wheat and rear sheep and goats for the first time. In this area, it is one of the earliest villages that we know about. Archaeologists who excavated the sound found the evidence of many kinds of animal bones from the earliest levels. These include bones of wild animals such as deer and pig. In later levels, they found more bones of sheep and goat, and in still later events, cattle bones are most common, suggesting that this was the animal that was generally kept by the people. Earlier and later levels. When archaeologists start digging at an excavation site, how do they know which level is earlier and which is later? Look at the illustration. Suppose people first start living on a flat land. Over the years, the surface will gradually rise because people discard waste materials and generally stay and rebuild houses in the same place. After hundreds and generally stay and rebuild houses in the same places. After hundreds of years, this leads to formation of mound. So when this mound is dug up, what is found from upper layer is the mound is generally from a later time than what is found from lower layer of the mound, which are older. These upper and lower layers are often referred as the levels. Other finds at Mehrag include remains of square and rectangular houses. Each house had 4 or more compartments, some of which may have been used for storage. When people die, their relatives and friends generally pay respect to them. People look after them, perhaps in belief that there is some form of life after death. Burial is such an arrangement. Several burial sites have been found in Mehrag. In one instance, the dead person was buried with goats, which were probably meant to serve as food in the next world. A closer look. Deojali Heading. Find Deojali Heading on map 2. This is a site on hills near the Brahmaputra Valley, close to routes leading into China and Myanmar. Here, stone tools including mortars and pestles have been found. This indicates that people were probably growing grain and preparing food from it. Other finds include jadeite, a stone that may have brought from China. Also, common are find of tools made of fossil wood and pottery. Chapter 3 finishes.